So I think probably now it's maybe a good time for us to actually try to define exactly what a virtual team is.
The thing that's important for us to do is give a definition and then slowly step away from it and not treat it with in too strict a form, because I mean, there's a lot of research that's been done in virtual teams. Interestingly, I think we consider it to be a phenomenon that has gripped us post-pandemic, but people have been researching this for decades, actually. And it's certainly, I'd say, the early 90s, as the capacity of the internet was starting to demonstrate itself, people were kind of saying, well, there's a revolution. We're never going to have to go into the office again. We can, it was almost one of these classic kind of utopia situations of, oh, this new technology is going to unleash something that we never before thought was possible. So it was all very upside. And then as actually it's been actually used, and virtual teams have started to proliferate, actual data has been collected, and we've started to understand the nuance of it. Definitionally, what we're talking about is two very clear-cut things that define a virtual team. And that is that members of the team, not necessarily all of them, but certainly key component members of the team, are separated by some kind of distance. And I guess what we'd say there is they're physically separated. That doesn't necessarily mean that they are in a different country or in a different continent or time zone, but they where they do their work from predominantly is not co-located, as I would say. So that's the first feature. And by virtue of the fact that they are not co-located, the second feature is that they rely on some kind of communication technology to do their work together.
Can I add one thing to that?
Yeah.
Because I think you're spot on. Those are definitely two of what I would see as the three things that makes it a virtual team. The first, which we shouldn't overlook, is it's a team rather than a group or a committee or a political party.
Right. Yeah. Of course.
So to be a virtual team, first you have to be a team, and you have to sort of labor under all of the things that makes you a team in the first place. Because I think it's easy to look at remote communication. I was thinking about when we were preparing for this, I was thinking about sort of military leadership has been diverse and global, fully remote and empowered by communication for years, but that doesn't make it a team. And so very specifically to constrain what we're talking about, it is first and foremost a team, and then geographically diverse, or as you quite rightly say, dispersed enough that communication by technology is, or non-present communication is required, and then that communication is probably facilitated by some sort of technology.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Remembering that there's a lot of technology mediated communication that happens in organizations that isn't necessarily facilitating teamwork.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, I'd say those three will define it for us, and you'll find all kinds of definitions in different significant pieces of research on virtual teams. A little note to say, you also hear them referred to as distributed teams, and in the Andrew Jassy stuff, we've also heard about this concept of hybrid teams. I say that we remain relatively relaxed about where the boundaries are between the definitions of those things. The distributed team concept was probably an ancestor of what we nowadays call a virtual team.
Yeah.
And you've also, hybrid teams is, if it's not intuitive enough already, a hybrid team is a team that is sometimes co-located and sometimes operating virtually, and that sits in a Venn diagram of what the new normal is, which is, a lot of organizations have maybe fixed days in the working week where everyone has to be in the office, or by virtue of different people's flexible working arrangements, they all overlap on certain days, and that renders the team a kind of hybrid team. But I would say what we're going to talk about whether you are a kind of thoroughbred virtual team, born virtual, and you're operating in, you work from an office in your house, and all of the people you connect with are scattered all over the world, and you only really pursue your work together virtually, or whether you exist in one of these kind of new normal situations where flexible work means that you do a lot of your work virtually. What we're going to talk about still applies. So we can be relatively relaxed about the definition.
Probably the nicest thing that I saw when we were looking at this to come up with a good definition was the description of it being a scale. It is not virtual or not virtual. It is a scale from fully present, co-located, working synchronously all the time, to um, let's say, for example, having to communicate with astronauts when they're in space. So to potentially
Yeah.
lead on to some of your topics, exactly as you say, it is a scale from very traditional formats of work that can only be done in person, to adding levels of remoteness to that, to fully remote teams that have potentially never met in person but still function like teams.
So say if you're achieving a substantive amount of your work assisted by technology, and regularly your ability to work in kind of co-presence is limited, then you're probably kind of admissible as a virtual team. But as I say, the elements of and the kind of characteristics of what working in a virtual team are like still apply, even if it's basically, my team all works in the same office, but we're not actually all there all the time,
Yeah.
and that requires us therefore to use technology. So let's remain a bit fluid about it. It's also, I think, important to acknowledge this is not some kind of newfangled way of working that has emerged since we were all in lockdown during COVID. Um, if you go back to that core characteristics, distributed geographically, or at least physically distributed, and relying on some form of technology to achieve communication,